"But my lord, are you sure?" Petrioff asked, as he had 13 times since they had begun. At least Manfred thought it was 13. He stopped keeping count. Giving a sigh, the von Carstein resisted the urge to decapitate his servant in a moment of irritated spite. He supposed he could not blame Petrioff. Even after several lifetimes' worth of audacious deeds, what he planned to perform tonight was perhaps on the wrong side of daring. "You worry too much," the Mortarch chuckled with false gentility. Glancing at his underling through the gloom of Castle Sternsine's undercroft, Manfred patted a small rune-marked box in his hands. "I lived through, endured the death of a world. Some would say I precipitated it. I think I can handle a bit of etheric rough and tumble." A low, rasping growl came from the back of the chamber, which saw Manfred snap his head around with a snarl. "And stop grumbling. Cowardice doesn't become you." In response, the dread abyssal gave a crackling hiss, furnace orange innards burning brighter as it snapped at the errant spirits drifting through the crypt. Snorting, Manfred looked back at the centre of the chamber. 7 living thralls, drawn from Carstania's most downtrodden villages, had already begun the ritual, marking the flagstones with sigils of corruption that were old when the realms were young. Already those runes were eating at the stonework, the rock bubbling into slurry. Even if tonight's ritual went flawlessly, this chamber would have to be sealed for decades. Still, Manfred had lived his own life on the principle that any advantage was worth seizing. The Mortarch took a moment to watch his minions pour tainted ichor and slabs of rancid meat into the cauldron, each motion accompanied by a sonorous dirge and the ringing of rusted iron bells. Then he glanced back at the box. "I acquired this at the Rot Soul Mire, you know," Manfred said, as he clicked open the lid and reached inside with a heavy nullstone gauntlet. Petrioff shuffled back a step as the Mortarch produced a crooked knife. The thing's blade looked to be carved from mildewed bone, its handle wrought of rotten heart oak wound with lurid ivy. Corruption emanated from the thing, fizzing against Manfred's fingers, even through the nullstone. Only the profane powers bound into the vampire's own being kept it in check. "You never know when such things will come in handy." The Mortarch strode forth, watching his thralls as they chanted, counting the syllables. As the 77th note of the dirge left his thralls, the vampire struck. The tainted blade carved open each throat in quick succession. Only the last of the thralls had time for instinct to take over and raise his hands in defence before the Mortarch's weapon carved through them and his neck alike. Manfred could feel Petrioff's hungry gaze as the crimson blood jetted outwards, splattering down into the cauldron. But the vampire had passed up feasts in the past for his own greater benefit. And he would doubtless do so again. As the bodies collapsed, Manfred stabbed downwards, driving the blade into the blood-soaked flesh within the receptacle. A column of light, mouldering green, feverish yellow, throttling purple, and all at once erupted from the cauldron, accompanied by a wave of nauseating stench. Pulling his cape close to ward off the odour, Manfred braced himself against an eruption of mystic force. Even over the insane sobbing that now filled the vault, he heard Petrioff scream as the vampire was launched backwards, and Ashirgoth bound to its feet with a clatter of bone. The Mortarch's commanding hiss saw the dread abyssal restrain itself, even as Manfred stared into the hateful unlight. The illumination dissipated. In its wake, something rose from within the cauldron. It appeared as a withered tree, unfolding its grasping barren branches. But Manfred knew it for an illusion. One only had to look to the shadow forming on the wall behind to see the truth of it, the image of some bloated, inhuman, horned entity. As the cacophony faded, Manfred lowered his cape and straightened, In the center of the tree's trunk bore a lonely milky eye, quivering with barely repressed rage.
"Bound from Castine,"
the tree demon wheezed. Its branches twitched with each syllable, the eye watering with gruesome seepage.
"Bold, even for you, to invite one of us to your halls."
Of all the places in the realms I do not care about, Castle Sternesti is the one I care about the least, the vampire shrugged. My only regret is your kind stench. I have never been able to get used to it.
"The grandfather is displeased with you, and your ilk vampire. You have run rampant as of late. You seek to halt blessed entropy to defy your place in his great cycle."
I'm afraid he's about to become a lot more displeased, Manfred chuckled. The Mortarch's expression sharpened into a scowl, narrowed eyes locked on that of the decay demon. Within this seal, creature, you are mine to command, so show me. Show me the bleeding gate. Gurgling in distaste, the demon's pupil shimmered out of focus. Upon the milky orb left in its wake, an image resolved. Manfred leant in closer. His eyes trailed over the image of a portal surrounded by carven vines, geistlight bleeding from it over the surrounding wasteland. Yes, there it is, the Mortarch murmured. More. Show me the defences. This time, the demon seemed slightly more obliging. A swirl of pus-laden blood congealed over the image before draining away to reveal hordes of trudging cyclopean demons, bloated monstrosities bathing amidst vile swamps, and tribes of mortals marked by unclean runes, debasing themselves before seeping altars.
"You see, von Castine," the demon crowed, "you feel the hopelessness of your task. The insurmountable truth of it. All Nvidia will rise against you. The cultivator will rise against you, to say nothing of the accursed Ever-Queen and her spawn."
Oh dear, what a pity. How will I get out of this one? The vampire said, smirking. Before he could continue, the demon gave a rattling laugh, its pupil reforming. The entity's gaze darted sidewards. Manfred's grin froze. One of his thralls had collapsed slightly off-centre, landing atop one of the binding runes of the circle and smudging it. A small detail, yes, but crucial. Neferata would be howling with laughter were she ever to learn of it. Another chortle left the entity, branches creaking and twitching.
"You really should be more careful, von Castine."
Manfred threw himself backwards and unsheathed the blade Geistvor a fraction of a second before the cauldron exploded, showering him with iron fragments. What arose from within was now a hulk of separating flesh, its lower body splitting into two stump-like legs, and its torso ripping open so the putrid organs could spill free. Branches punched from its shoulders and cracked in the fetid air, whilst its limbs were as mouldering trunks. In the centre of the entity's chest, the eye opened once more, staring out with redoubled fury. Mouths lolled open across the demon's flesh before belching forth a stream of celestial sorcery. Rasping a series of incantations, Manfred thrust a hand forward and unleashed a counterspell. A storm of screaming spirits erupted to meet the ruinous energies, both spells bursting in a shower of force. Manfred had only the time to raise his blade as the rot demon stomped forward with uncanny haste, driving a trunk limb towards him. One hand gripping Geistvor's hilt, the one bracing itself against the flat of its blade, the vampire caught the blow. Any mortal would have been hurled from his feet, if not pulped outright. Instead, preternatural strength flooded into Manfred's limbs, his might matched against that of the demon now, looming over him. Looking up at the blade, Manfred caught his foe's gaze. Despite himself, he grinned. A yell of fury heralded Petrioff's return. He had worked his way around the demon's flank and now charged with sword drawn. Manfred's foe did not even avert its gaze. For all the power behind the other vampire's blow, it accomplished little more than seeing his elegant blade stick fast in the demon's bark flesh. Before Petrioff could pull free, a cluster of slick vines burst from the infernal creature, enveloping him. Manfred could only tut as Petrioff howled in agony and terror, struggling helplessly as he was absorbed into the demon's body. Devouring the vampire seemed to grant the demon a second wind. Its eye quivered with the expectancy of murder as it pressed against Geistfor, more vines questing out for Manfred. An insane burble left the creature as Manfred hissed and was forced to a knee. In response, the vampire lifted his gaze, still grinning, and spat a single word. "Sharagoth!" The chamber suddenly echoed to the clatter of bone claws, and a howl fit to freeze soul split the air. Waiting for his opponent to overbalance, Manfred threw himself prone, ducking beneath the demon's oaken limb. Before it could crush him, the entity staggered back as the Mortarch's dread abyssal pounced into its chest. Laughter turned to bellows of anger, then howls of denial, as Sharagoth pinned the demon down and began tearing into it. As sickening noises filled the vault, Manfred grunted. The von Carstein painfully got back to his feet, with Geistfor's aid, watching his mount expel its outrage for a few long moments. "You claimed that the task awaiting me in Invidia is unsurmountable," Manfred said, snarling for Sharagoth to cease. All that now remained of the demon was a crooked spur of bark, the eye still quivering at its core. Even that was fading, the entity's strength thoroughly beaten out of it. Yet, as he lifted his blade and aimed its tip at the slime-weeping orb, Manfred grinned. There was one last thing he wanted to hear on this plane. "The truth is, you're absolutely right." With a single smooth motion, the vampire drove Geistfor down, right into the demon's core. Yet, even over its howls, Manfred was certain his final remark reached it. "In fact, I intend to make sure of it."